understand. A few housekeeping notes about this program. Mr. Achkar will talk for about 20 minutes. And during that time, we encourage you to put your questions in the chat. After his remarks, I will ask a few questions, and then I will turn the program over to Brenna Williams, our executive director, who will handle the questions that are in the chat and then close out the program. Thank you all for joining us today for what promises to be an interesting program. So Alan Achkar has been executive editor of the Post and STL Today, the online version of the paper, since April, and he oversees all news and sports coverage. He was previously editor of the South Bend Tribune, where he served as Northern Indiana editor for Gannett, the nation's largest newspaper chain. He holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from Northwestern University and a master's in public policy from the London School of Economics. This is not Mr. Achkar's first stint in St. Louis. He previously served as local news editor of the Post, and he says that he is thrilled to be back in town, and we are thrilled to have him here today. So, Mr. Achkar, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you for inviting me and hosting me. This is my second time back in St. Louis, so I'm excited about that in a new role, of course. And it's a big challenge and a big responsibility, which we're about to talk about. But thank you for having me. And I'm always happy to address groups of any size to explain what we do and why we do it, because I know a lot of times people look at decisions we make, whether in print or online, and wonder what we're thinking or what motivated or drove something. I'm always fascinated by the grand conspiracies that are often concocted to explain what we do, and it's not usually that complicated. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to answer any questions about our coverage, our future, our past, etc. And please fire away with any questions after I'm done. I want to spend my portion here. Barbara had asked me to focus on two key topics. One is, why has the newsroom and the paper shrunk as much as it has in recent years? And then number two, which is related, our drive to grow digitally and to pivot more and more into a digital news organization as opposed to strictly a print one, what that looks like, and what the challenges there and what that means for journalism and journalists. So let me start with the idea of a shrinking newsroom and a shrinking product. So I don't think it's going to be news to anyone on this call that there's one comet that landed in our universe about 20 years ago called the internet. That's it. It's the internet. That explains why newsrooms have shrunk. But let me unpack that a little bit. What many people don't realize is newspapers for about 140 years made the bulk of their money not from what we charged you, not from subscriptions. Many of you can probably remember when you could pick up the paper for a dime or 25 cents. Well, why was it so cheap? Because 85 to 90% of our revenue came from advertising. Newspapers were a business model built almost entirely around advertising. The money we made from subscribers, wasn't really covering the bills. It was advertising. So, and that worked phenomenally well for 140, 150 years. Then the internet comes along and blows everything up. One of the early things, you may all remember the classified ads. You may remember the day when if you had a garage sale or you wanted to hire someone, you would take out a classified ad. Craigslist.com comes along and basically eviscerates newspapers' classified advertising. Okay, there goes that. There's one leg of the revenue model that's gone. Department stores, you may remember the days of several massive ads from Macy's and other department stores. Well, the internet forced them to pivot. They had new ways to reach people, email marketing, websites. They didn't need to take out as many newspaper ads as they went. Department stores started advertising less. Auto dealers, always a huge advertiser for newspapers, found the same things. They had new ways to reach customers. They didn't need to rely just on newspapers. Auto dealerships started taking out fewer ads. And so what the internet did by creating competitors like Craigslist, by giving large advertisers we had always relied on new ways to reach their target customers, whether through the internet, email, newsletters, etc., started spending less and less money. And when you're relying on only 10 to 15% of your revenue from subscribers, and advertising, which has always been the bulk of it, is quickly and rapidly shrinking every year, you've got to cut costs. And that's how newsrooms began to shrink. And that's why we started losing some sections of the newspaper. We didn't have quite the same number of people to produce these sections. We wanted to save on newsprint costs. And so the economic realities forced us to make some very difficult decisions. But one of the things we found out was there's not as much money in advertising online as there was in newspapers. We had a monopoly before. For 140 years, we had a monopoly. If you wanted to advertise your business or hire someone or advertise your garage sale, you went to the local newspaper. Maybe you took out an ad on local TV. That was the extent of your options. The internet meant plenty more options for folks. And so we lost our monopoly. And so we had to cut costs to deal with that financial reality. And other things started to occur, such as, are there functions we can centralize to help save costs? So does every newspaper need its own page designers, or can pages be designed and put together by a central group of people in a particular area? Can finance functions, HR functions, other functions be centralized in corporate headquarters so that local offices don't have to spend as much time and money on that? And so you saw these decisions to centralize some functions, cut staff, because we had to do that to survive. It was our economic model being eviscerated before our eyes. But I will also tell you, there was a massive self-inflicted wound that occurred about 20 years ago. Most newspapers, as the internet was sort of in the late 90s, early 2000s, really starting to take off, newspapers actually were among the first websites that were created. We weren't late to the dance. We recognized, oh, this is an interesting new way of reaching people. So we played in the pool. That wasn't the problem. There was a fateful decision made, though, which is to make those websites free. So what we did for years and years is took all of our content, which people were paying for here, but putting it all for free on the internet. Now, why were we so dumb to do that? Well, it goes back to what I said. 90% of our revenue is from advertising. What newspaper publishers thought was the same model would work on the internet as it did in print. Hey, just put it up for free. Why nickel and dime people? All those advertisers are going to follow us online. They're going to want to advertise on our website. It's fine. Just make it free. Let's just build up as big an audience as we can online, and we'll charge for the advertising. Well, the model did not translate. Turns out advertising much less effective online. People click off of it. They put up ad blockers and spam blockers. They scroll right over it. Click-through rates, in other words, the rate of people clicking on an online ad is horribly low. It's like 1%. It's an incredibly ineffective way of advertising. The traditional kind of banner ads on websites, they're a nuisance, they're an annoyance. People don't like them. They want to block them. So advertisers realized we don't want that. And so there is still a lot of that when you go on websites, but advertisers have found other ways of reaching customers. And so that is how, in 5 minutes or less, we got to where we are in newspapers. Our monopoly was essentially evaporated. So the laziness that we developed over 140 years suddenly got blown up. And our business model of relying heavily on advertising got blown up on us. And suddenly advertisers had many more options. And we made the mistake early on of conditioning people to think that news should be free online. Huge mistake. I think if you ask any newspaper publisher editor if they could get into a time machine and go back 20 years, they would not make that same decision. They would say, put up a paywall, make people pay for it, because while coffee companies, for example, in this same time frame, are conditioning people to think that it's okay to pay $8 for a cup of coffee, which is a ridiculous notion, by the way, newspapers were doing the opposite. They were convincing people that news should be free online. And we did that for a long time. And so when we try now to charge people, we run into friction because, like, no, you told me this was free. Why am I now being charged for it? In addition, you've got things like Facebook and Google News that also helped propagate the idea that news should be free, should be easily available, and you shouldn't have to pay for it. And that works against our interests. So all that being said, second part of what I want to address, I explained why we have to pivot to digital. And so how do we do that? And what does that mean? And we have always, I mean, you're not going to be surprised to know that our online audience is significantly larger than our print audience. Just we can reach a lot more people. It's not location based. You're not waiting for delivery at your doorstep. So we have a massive audience. But there's some, I'm going to mention three challenges. Number one is monetizing that. I just got done saying we spent 20 years telling people this is okay to be free. In the last few years, really in just the last few years, newspapers have kind of said, okay, advertising revenue is going this way. We need to pivot more to subscriber and consumer revenue. And so we're trying to change our business model. And people don't like that. They don't like to be told, not all people like to be told, you have to pay for this online. So we run into that friction. The other challenge with telling people, hey, we would like you to subscribe to us digitally. We're competing with Netflix, with Amazon, with Spotify, with a range of media outlets that are similarly doing the same thing. Netflix wants $20 a month from you. Apple Plus wants, I think they just increased their rates to $6 a month. ESPN Plus wants this much. Your local cable, if you still have cable, wants this much to provide you Wi-Fi. Oh, and by the way, the local newspaper wants X amount as well. And so people have so many options across so many media forms that we have to provide them with a reason to buy into that. And that can be tough when they're looking at music, movies, etc. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two in the digital space is attention span. The internet has destroyed the public's attention span. It's made people sort of hyper about scrolling through information. They get bombarded with large volumes of information on their Facebook feed or Twitter or even on TV. I mean, you look at the pace of TV shows today compared to 20, 30 years ago. If you watch an old TV program from 20 or 30 years ago, you will be shocked at how slow it suddenly feels. Very, very slow. And that's because attention spans have gone like this. And so we're fighting for people to understand, read our content, learn about their local community when they're distracted by Facebook and their Twitter feed and look at this and look at that. And there's just a constant barrage of information and entertainment coming at people. And we have to fight not just to get them to subscribe to us, but to also just pay attention. It's a huge challenge in the digital space. Third challenge is media literacy. You know, you've heard the term fake news, which has been completely overused. But people have lost any trust in what they read. Many people have. You just don't know if something crawls across your digital screen. Is it legitimate? Is it real? Is it from a legitimate news source? Now, we have the advantage of St. Louis Post-Dispatch. We're a 150 plus year old brand that does carry some weight. But there's been an effort over the last several years to erode the trust in traditional media. I'm not making a political statement, I'm making a factual statement. It's been a strategy, erode the trust in traditional media. And that makes it hard for people to go, well, can I trust this or can I not? The other thing that social media and Google and others have done is people just see a scroll of stories and information on their screens. Where is it coming from? Is it from a legitimate outlet? Who's funding that outlet? What's behind this particular outlet? Do they have a particular ideology? It's very difficult to decipher that. And so we fight with that. This lack of media literacy is a real problem because there's just a general either misunderstanding of information or a lack of trust that does affect us. So media literacy, a huge problem. It's why a lot of news companies now are partnering with schools to start teaching kids at an early age. Here's what you can trust on social media and the internet. Here's what you can't trust. Or you don't know whether you can trust what you're reading. Here's steps that you can take to try to figure out whether this is really legit information or not. But what's really frightening to me is, and I see educated, highly educated adults do this. They see a headline or a couple of paragraphs on a screen somewhere, whether it's an email or their Facebook scroll, and they just assume it's fact. And then they recirculate that information. And it's unbelievable how quickly wrong information can spread these days. It's frightening, actually. And it's a huge problem for us because, again, we're trying to make people understand what we are producing is professionally vetted by highly trained people and it's legitimate. But sometimes people don't trust that. That's a problem. Here's the good news, though, in the digital space for us and what it means for the future of journalism. The digital space has created several new outlets of really great journalism. There are several nonprofits that in just the last few years have either grown or developed to help fill the gaps where newspapers and TV stations aren't maybe doing as much. These nonprofits have been created. They're doing really great investigative journalism to help make up the gap. So new journalism organizations are forming to help kind of fill some of these gaps. It's a very exciting and interesting development. We've run stories ourselves from some of these organizations because they're hiring great people. Many of them used to work at newspapers, and they're doing some really great work. The other thing with the digital space that I mentioned, we can reach so many more people in the digital space. That's exciting. We have a very large audience, hundreds of thousands, millions of people that we can reach with a really good story. So our really great work can spread faster and to more people. That's exciting. The other thing we have found that's highly encouraging in the digital space is really great local journalism, investigative, revelatory enterprise journalism does well online. It gets good readership and it pushes people to subscribe to us in the digital space. So, for example, just a couple stories we have published recently. One was a story spent a lot of time on documenting how out-of-state real estate investment companies have bought tens of thousands of homes in our area. There are entire streets owned entirely today by out-of-state investment companies, which is concerning in many ways if you stop and think about the implications of that. We documented that. We put a number to it, 34,000 homes in the area owned by people, not even people, investment companies not based here. And there's a lot of concern about various advocates about that. We revealed that, got a lot of traffic, got us several new digital subscriptions. We had a story this past Sunday about a local nonprofit that is raising questions about how it used millions of dollars it received from the federal government during the pandemic to provide food for hungry children. Well, $1 million of what they received was used to buy the director a new house in St. Charles. I don't think that's feeding hungry children. That seems to be a mismatch from their mission, right? Lots of traffic, a lot of new digital subscriptions from that story. And so the encouraging thing with the digital space, what we're finding is when we do really great work that reveals something, serves the community well, which is what newspapers really have been known for decades, it does get attention. It doesn't necessarily get lost, and it's a way for us to distinguish ourselves. What the digital space provides us also is a wealth of data. We can break down minute by minute what stories people are reading, what topics they're interested in, and it can help guide our work. We have more information now than we ever have about what you're reading and what you're following, and it helps us now make decisions about these are the kinds of stories that we should be pursuing because there's strong interest in them. And, look, obviously, cat videos will get a lot of viewerships. I'm not saying we should do a lot of cat videos. We can make responsible decisions about the really good, solid journalism that we can provide. And the digital space allows us to really make smarter decisions. That's also a really big, whereas with newspapers for years, it was like, we think people are going to be interested in the story. We never really knew. Digital allows us now to really rely on some really great reader data to make some informed decisions about what you're reading. And I'm going to end on this point because it's related to it. What the digital space has done is has completely turned the tables on media. So for decades, we told you what was important. We decided what was on the front page. The TV stations decided what the lead stories were. It was kind of a passive arrangement on your end where you're just relying on us to tell you what the big stories are. The tables have completely turned. The readers, the consumers, the viewers are now in charge because we're fighting for your attention, your eyeballs, as I said, in the digital space, and you're in control in terms of deciding these are the stories we want to read in the digital space, these are the stories we don't care about. So readers and consumers in digital space are controlling the decision-making in a lot of ways because we want to know what you're reading and what it is that you want from us. And during the Trump era in particular, that raised a lot of questions because this can get thorny in the sense that anyone who wrote a story about Donald Trump, it would always do very well and get high readership. Great. I can post 10 cat videos tomorrow and get massive viewership on my website. I just can't. I'm sorry. It's just the truth. But is that the responsible thing to do? No, it's not. And so we do have to be careful with, okay, I know that's what the reader is telling us they want, but we still have a certain responsibility here. And so ethical and other considerations still need to come into play. So I will end on that note. It's about my 20 minutes. And that hopefully explains a little bit about what's happened to us and then what we're trying to pivot towards. So Barbara, I think, do you take over here or what's the next step?
I will. I do have a lot of questions and you have inspired me to add to my list. Just a weird thought here. Do you think a newspaper should be tax supported by their communities?
So that is a debate that has come up. The challenge with saying tax supported means you would be receiving money from a government body of some sort, in essence. And so if we're going to be tax supported by the city of St. Louis, for example, we're supposed to cover the city of St. Louis in an unbiased, objective way. Does our bias or objectivity get somehow corrupted if people know we're getting money that's being channeled through the city from taxpayers? I don't know. That's tricky. I know there's been debate about doing it at the federal level, whether there should be federal tax money that flows to newspapers. And that some debate has occurred. So, but wait a minute. We're supposed to cover the government and the federal branches of government. If they're suddenly funneling money to you, does that alter the relationship? And it's why, by the way, there's a very hard wall between advertising and news. We don't advertise to tell us what to do. We cannot appear to have the idea that companies are somehow funding stories. Well, if governments are essentially funding stories, think about that's a slippery slope. So that's why there's been a lot of hand-wringing over that idea, Barbara, and it's a tricky one. Very tricky.
Okay. Can you discuss the relationship between the Post and Lee Enterprises. I know that Lee owns the Post, but where are the decisions made? Do they make decisions about staffing in the newsroom?
Yes and no. So first, coverage decisions are made entirely in St. Louis. Lee does not tell us what to cover, how to cover it, who to cover. So news coverage decisions are done entirely in St. Louis. Lee doesn't control. I mean, I guess they could if they wanted to, but they have said those decisions should be made locally. In terms of how we deploy our resources, again, completely dependent on us. But they are our parent company, they are our corporate company. So in terms of resource decisions, yeah, we get a budget that they tell us is our budget. So we have to work within the parameters of what corporate thinks our budget should be, which is based on revenue and et cetera, et cetera. So I can't just snap my fingers and say, I want to add 20 reporters to the newsroom. Corporate would have to sign off on that. Now, if they said, great, yes, we let you add 20 reporters, I can decide how those 20 reporters are deployed. I mentioned centralization. This is where the comics thing comes in. So for those of you who have noticed, we blew up our comics pages. We have fewer comics in print. We have many more online, by the way, which I know that's pros and cons to that. But corporate decided there was money to be saved by going to a uniform comics page across all of its newspapers. It did save a substantial amount of money, by the way. Not necessarily the best reader experience, although we tried to make it better with online, but that was a decision made by corporate that affected all of its properties, not just St. Louis. So decisions like that come at the corporate level. Budgets, monetary decisions are eventually run through corporate, but how we cover the news, how we deploy the resources, what we cover is done entirely in St. Louis.
Okay. How many reporters were in the newsroom when you first came to the Post? And how many reporters are in the newsroom now? Yeah,
so at the moment, total staff, I'd have to break down between photographers and reporters. But overall, we're about in the 75, high 70s, almost 80 right now. That includes some part-timers. Let's say 75 to 80 currently. I left here in 2013. I was here from 05 to 2013. When I left in 2013, we were probably still over 100 at that point. I don't know how much over 100. Even between 05 and 13, it had dropped, as you can imagine. So we were definitely still over 100 at that point, but we are below 80 at this point. So that, again, the idea that we've had to shrink fairly substantially because of the economic factors. I will tell you, though, that at our current size, we are still, it's not really that close. We are still the largest local news outlet in terms of bodies anywhere in the St. Louis region. So we still have the largest newsroom of anyone, even at that number. So that's not a tiny number.
But do you think that current staffing is sufficient to cover everything you'd like to cover?
Well, no. I mean, I'd love to have twice or three times a newsroom like we used to. It has forced us to make decisions about what areas we cover, what beats we cover. And yeah, we do have to make decisions on a daily basis about maybe this is a story we can't cover. But this is where it goes back to being really strategic about what is it absolutely necessary for us to tell readers about. And, I will tell you, though, when we were at Much Larger News, we were covering a lot of stuff that was kind of maybe not the highest priority. People weren't really reading. We probably weren't making the best choices back then. I think with all the more data information we have now, if we had a larger newsroom, we would probably fire on even more pistons than we were back in the day. But yeah, do we cover everything we would like to cover on a daily basis? No. But we are trying to be smarter about where we put our resources and the stories that we do cover. So, but yeah, I'd love to have twice a newsroom. Barbara, if you can sign off on that, I'd be all for it. Did we lose Barbara?
On the front page about how arts organizations were benefiting from being in St. Louis because they could attract directors from all over the country who want to live here. And this was a wonderful story. It was a major story, but I find it sort of incongruous that this story got written and got such good play when you have decided to eliminate your coverage of arts organizations and their products. So talk about that a little bit.
It's actually not incongruous. We actually did not eliminate coverage of the arts. This was a highly misunderstood because it took off on social media and people did not understand the decision that was made there. What we eliminated was one very specific category of arts coverage, and that was reviews. So, and by that, I mean reviews of symphony performances, theatrical performances, etc. Why did we do that? Because not very many people were reading them. I mentioned going through our digital strategies. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. It was among the lowest ranking stuff being read, content being read. Now, I think those reviews had a very loyal and strong audience, but not a very large audience. And so we said, okay. And we had some reporters that was entirely what they were doing, was just reviews. And so we stepped back and said, okay, those reviews are probably hitting some fairly small niche audiences, and they do serve a purpose. However, what if we broaden the scope of what those reporters do? What if instead of just reviews, we had them write interesting profiles, names in the arts community you're not aware of, interesting stories, trends, broader themes in the arts community. Let's write art stories, not just for people intensely interested in the arts, but maybe for people who aren't intensely interested in the arts and maybe would like to know more about the arts. And so the story that you mentioned, Barbara, this past Sunday about artists moving to New York was an extension of that philosophy. And what we said was, when we do those stories, we do them all, we're going to put them on the front page and we're going to hype them on the website, and they're going to get more readership than any review ever could or would. And so we didn't cut arts coverage, we changed it. And we're trying to do higher profile, better stories, not just reviews, that can get a stronger audience and a stronger readership, and that we can play more prominently. So that story, I think, is actually a success to that, a tribute to that philosophy. That same reporter did a story a couple of months ago about a local actor who had spent time in prison, was now out of prison, back in the local theater scene. You know, those are the kinds of stories we're now doing in the arts community. By the way, we're still doing previews. We're still doing the what's playing when. We're still providing that consumer information. But I want to be clear on this. We didn't cut arts coverage. We just changed it. So that's the answer to that question.
Is it possible that the people who were reading those reviews were reading them in the paper and not online, so you don't really know how many people were reading them?
Very, very possible, yes. But I would argue that, again, see, this is interesting with print. It's hard to know for sure, right, Barbara? But that report, instead of doing 2 reviews, wrote a front page story that I bet you more people saw in print than they would have with a review that would have run inside somewhere. So I still think for print, it's a viable strategy, which, by the way, this has really only been in the last few months. I said from day one, we'll change. If this philosophy flops, it's not working, we'll change it back. Subject to change, by the way, but for now, we're letting this play out to see how it goes. But I was really glad that we got a great front page story this past week.
Are you aware of audience reduction experienced by some arts organizations as a result of lack of reviews?
No, I mean, that would be, so when someone calls to cancel, they are asked, why are you canceling? And our customer service folks have buckets they put them under. You know, poor delivery, pricing, content is a category, but they don't break it down any finer. They will add a note if the person is very specific. So if they said, I am canceling strictly because of the arts reviews, they will note that. So it's hard to really say for sure why someone canceled. So we do not have the data to say we lost X number of people for arts reviews. Now, I will tell you that content has never been a leading source of cancellation. At the moment, the biggest is delivery. So that's really what we're losing the most number. Well, there's just a general idea that fewer and fewer people, especially under the age of whatever, are reading newspaper, right? So that the idea that it's not a medium that a majority of people consume information on, that's been there for 20 years since the internet, right? So that's a big reason. But I'd say right now, delivery is a huge, huge driver, much more so than content. And for those who've had bad delivery, short explanation for that. It's not my department. Here's a short explanation. Finding carriers has become impossible. So pandemic hits, the great resignation occurs, restaurants, hotels, newspapers can't find enough workers. The pandemic eased, the workers never came back. So we don't have enough carriers. We have several open routes. We've got current carriers trying to do 2-3 routes. They don't always get to them at all times. We still have routes that have no dedicated carriers. Office staff tries to pick up the pieces, but it is a labor problem. It's not that we don't care. It's just a massive labor problem. If you've tried to go to a restaurant these days, check into a hotel, you've noticed the same problem. Not enough waiters, not enough clerks, etc. That's the problem that we're facing. That's why delivery is so spotty, and that's a problem. There's been all kinds of discussion about marketing and recruiting, but that right now has been the biggest source of cancellations.
I'm going to just have maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Would you talk about what driving digital means? Do you want to drive readers away from the print edition onto your digital format? Or do you want to improve the digital format so that people just will go to both?
So, no, we don't want to drive away print subscribers. What we're trying to encourage print subscribers to do, though, is we have multiple ways of accessing us online. There's the e-edition, which is literally the newspaper as it looks in print. It just shows up on your computer or laptop or phone. And if you click on a story on a page, it pops up like in a digital friendly way, and then you can click off and it goes back to the actual newspaper page. So that's, if you really like the newspaper format and look and the sort of the finite nature of the newspaper, the e-edition is one option. You can go to our website, which I know a lot of people don't like because it's not finite. I mean, you could spend hours on a website, right? But that is a way to do so. And then we also have an app, a mobile app, that in fact, in the next week or 2 is going to be improved and hopefully function better. So we have an app, we have the website, which you can get on your phone. There's the app, or you can just go to the website on your phone, the mobile site. Of course, on a regular computer screen, there's also the e-edition. So driving digital really is building up our audience on these platforms. If you're a print subscriber, you get access to all of these things. Whereas if you're not, you get, I think it's 3 stories a month, and then you'll hit a paywall. So, but print subscribers get access to all of this. So yeah, we want to encourage print readers, like, try out, you get it for free anyways, try it out. You have to create a login and a password like any other thing, which I know can be a pain, and you forget your password, and, I get all that. But we want to encourage them to do that. We're not trying to drive away print readers, but what we're confronting is the reality is our print readers are not going to grow. It's a number that's going to most likely continue to drop in coming years. So, but we know it's growing over here on digital. It is growing, by the way, including paid subscribers. So we know one is growing, we know one is shrinking. We're not going to change those trends. So we're trying to balance all of that out.
Okay, great. And then my final question is, can you give us some examples of what you call high impact journalism?
We've talked about 3 examples. Investigative journalism, like the local nonprofit with questions about how they're using money. A really great feature on artists from New York moving to St. Louis. I think that's a high impact story. It's a unique story that no other media outlet has. We revealed something to people. The story in the local real estate market, revelatory story that we did some great reporting on that no one else had. It's a story that is unique, that is revelatory, that tells people something that maybe they weren't aware of, that educates them, outrages them, entertains them. Hey, did you read ... That kind of story, right? The kind of story that where people go, oh, this is interesting. A Bill McClellan column is a high impact story. Bill he's retired now, and he only writes once a week on a freelance basis, a part-time basis for us. You want to talk about high impact. Bill McClellan has been high impact for years. Incredibly strong following, super talented writer. That's high impact. People go, hey, did you read Bill ... That's a high impact story as well. So that's what I mean by high impact.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for your time and your explanation of all this. And I'm going to turn the program over to Brenna Williams, our executive director, and she is going to handle all the questions that have come in through the chat.
Okay. Brenna, you're on mute, by the way.
Sorry. We have quite a few questions, so I'm going to try to go sort of in theme based. So we talked a little bit about investigative journalism, and Mary, who's watching on YouTube, says an opinion piece by Lydia Polgreen on the importance of local news published in the New York Times said local reporting matters so much that one former editor of this newspaper, Dean Baquet, created and will lead New York Times Fellowship to help local reporters take on big, challenging investigations, like the ones he did over his career. He earned a Pulitzer for his reporting on debtors' prisons in Missouri. Is there any possibility of the Post working on another challenging investigation and getting a Baquet Fellowship?
So, interestingly enough, the New York Times just announced their retired editor Dean is going to head up this thing where they will partner with local news reporters. I don't think just newspaper reporters, although I suspect that'll be the bulk of it, to work on great stories or to help with training. I'd be open if we had a reporter who had a particular story or we thought could benefit from that. I'd be wide open to that. I will tell you, when I was in South Bend before I came here, we did that with a nonprofit organization called ProPublica. They've been around since 2008. They're a nonprofit. This is one of the examples when I talked about a digital nonprofit. ProPublica is one. They're a national organization based in New York. They do only investigative reporting, generally at the national level, but they created a program a few years ago called the Local Reporting Network, where they said, if you're a local news outlet, TV, newspaper, whatever, you've got a great story that we can help partner with you on, give you expertise, resources to deliver that story, let us know. We did that. We worked with them for a year, produced a series of great stories about a local police department, and got some great results from that. I am wide open to collaborating with other organizations that can help us deliver great work, whether it's New York Times, ProPublica, or other organizations. So I think what the New York Times is doing is great. It's super interesting. They just announced it and just launched it. So we'll see how it goes and how it plays out. But I think it's very exciting. And it's something we would definitely be open to if we had the right story and the right reporting. They just announced it, so we haven't really had a chance to digest it very carefully, but we will. I'm definitely open to that.
Great. Maria and Jenny, who are on Zoom, had a couple of questions. You just referenced ProPublica as a good nonprofit doing a worthy investigative journalism. Are there any other nonprofits doing great investigative work?
ProPublica is one. Marshall Project is another. They specialize specifically in criminal justice investigative journalism. They have opened some bureaus in local cities. They just opened one in Cleveland a few months ago. They have 3 or 4 reporters working on investigative stories in the criminal justice system in Cleveland. They've done it in a couple other cities, Denver, somewhere else. They actually were exploring doing one in St. Louis, and they came to talk to us about partnership opportunities. I think they've run into some fundraising issues. Nonprofits, they have to raise the money. It's all fundraising. So if they can't raise the money, then they can't do it. So, but I know they were looking into that. ProPublica actually has a former reporter from St. Louis from our staff, Jeremy Kohler, they created like a Midwest investigative team based largely in Chicago, but they now have reporters in some key cities like St. Louis doing investigative journalism. It's just one person here, but still, we actually published one of his stories a couple months ago. It was about how some affluent neighborhoods in the city were paying off-duty cops to provide personalized police service. That was a ProPublica story that we co-published with them. And our philosophy was, if we're not doing the story and it's a great investigative story and we can publish it for free, why not? How is this a bad deal for us? So ProPublica, Marshall Project, what you've also seen in some other cities is local news nonprofits have sprung up. So newsrooms of anywhere from 5 to even 15 people covering a local city. They've been able to raise a lot of local money. Usually it's a big local foundation or two that really provide a base funding source. So Cleveland, something called the Baltimore Banner is probably the biggest one. They created an entire newsroom of like 30 people. There was a local philanthropist billionaire who really underwrote a big chunk of it. But so there's been some really interesting local news nonprofits that have sprung up in some cities. I don't know if we have the philanthropic or kind of foundation funding in St. Louis for something like that. I think this is where the Marshall Project ran into some issues, but I know other cities do. And these are all fairly new creations, by the way. I don't know if they're all going to survive. I think at some point there's a finite amount of money in the world of philanthropy and foundations. And so we'll see how many of these survive, but lots of interesting experimentation going on right now with nonprofit journalism.
Just along those lines, Jenny Perget just posted in the chat that if anyone on the call is interested in bringing the Marshall Project here, to contact her, and she put her email in there. So it sounds like she has some more information. Okay, just talking about, you talked about the sort of fake media trend over the last few years. What are your thoughts on how we can help people regain their trust in the mainstream media?
You know, that's a really good question. And I think at the end of the day, first of all, we have to stick to what made newspapers reliable sources of information: unbiased, objective, cover all sides. I mean, the sort of truism in newspapers have always been, if both sides are mad at you, you've done your job well, right? So we've been called, you know, a liberal left-wing rag. We've also been accused of being in the pockets of big business and Republican conservative, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, probably means we've done our job well because we're trying to cover all sides. So that means covering Republican candidates, covering Democratic candidates, and trying to do so equally and fairly, calling out, regardless of party, poor decisions, calling them out fairly as we can. Now, there's an important distinction here, which is the editorial page, which is opinion. And I will tell you, this has been a problem with newspapers really since their inception. Opinion pages are completely separate from the newsroom. They have no impact on news coverage. They don't even talk to the reporters unless it's a factual thing. They do not influence what the news coverage does. But they run in the same publication. It confuses people. Well, you wrote an editorial slamming the Republicans, therefore you must be a liberal newspapers. And we have to educate people to say, well, no, that's a separate arm of the operation. They don't affect the news coverage. But that has been increasingly a source of debate in our industry. Many newspapers have stopped doing editorials because of exactly the confusion and accusations that they have caused. We have not made that decision here. I still think there's value to having an editorial page and saying something, but it is an issue that clouds this idea of we're objective and we're fair. It can be confusing for some readers, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, our job is to do work that is objective and that is fair. And I do think something I mentioned earlier, newspapers, we probably need to start thinking about more ideas like, do we need to go to schools and develop programs to help with this idea of media literacy? You know, my kids who are teenagers, I'm sometimes shocked. Oh my God, did you see this? And I'll go, it's bogus. Did you see the website it came from? Right? So I'm doing my own individual media literacy, but I'm wondering if we need to sort of start developing some education programs with schools to get kids at an early age to understand, look, some stuff you can believe and some stuff you need to look into just a little deeper to make sure you understand where that's coming from.
Related to that, we have a couple of questions about trolls. Ellen commented that there's a lot of trolls that are dominating the comment section. Have you thought of eliminating comments? And then there's another question: is there anything that can be done by the post or news outlets that can make our democratic system survive the troll era and the misinformation that comes from that?
Yeah, I agree. Comment sections. I mean, look, you want the cesspool of society, go to the comment section, not even on our stories, social media comments. I mean, that is the cesspool of society right there. And what's infuriating is many of the folks are just playing a game. They're intentionally posting inflammatory comments because they think it's funny. They just want to see the reaction to it. Those are classic trolls, by the way. They're doing it as almost a joke, and they just want to watch people get riled up. It's why I always encourage people to just don't engage in the comment section. If you want to make a point, make it, but don't. You start devolving into this back and forth. Someone could be pulling your leg. You don't even know who you're debating. I'm not a fan of comment sections. Leap Enterprises currently has comment sections on our stories. I actually think at one time in the Post-Dispatch in recent history, we did eliminate them. What's interesting is there's a lot of people who think there's still value in the comment section in the sense that I have something relevant to say about this story, or I have a viewpoint for this story that I think shows another side or amplifies a point that you made. And actually, we do get, believe it or not, we do get a lot of those kinds of comments that are actually helpful, interesting. Maybe they provide extra information, more context. We had people kind of go, turning them off completely. Is that really the right answer? Because what if someone does have something legitimate to say? So this is the struggle. How you do that, but then don't let the trolls get out of control. I will tell you that moderating comment sections is incredibly time consuming. I mean, you're talking about a full-time job, probably for more than one person, to just constantly be monitoring these. We do some of that. And by the way, if someone flags a really bad comment, we will go in and delete it. Or we know some stories, if we think they're going to get a lot of comments, especially if it's a sensitive topic like race or something, we will actively monitor comment and take out ones that are, over the top. So eliminating them altogether, I think would upset some people. And but then leaving them unmonitored is a whole other. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's no easy answers here, and I struggle with this myself. And I don't know what the answer is. I will tell you that the question of eliminating them altogether will be on the table at some point. I don't know where we're going to land on it, though. I'm not breaking news. I'm not saying we're eliminating comment section. I'm just saying I think it's an idea we do have to examine.
Ellen, are you a hard stop at 1 o'clock, or do you have time to go over a little bit?
I don't know if you're asking me, but I don't care.
No, Ellen.
Oh, Ellen.
Oh, no,
okay.
I'm fine. I can go over. Yeah, no, I can go over.
Okay. All right. Okay. How are the decisions made on which AP and Washington Post articles are included in the paper? Mary is watching on YouTube, and she finds that she reads most of the AP articles, or she doesn't read them on the Post-Dispatch because they're old news that she'd already read the day before.
Right. There's the great tension point between what purpose does the newspaper still serve when it comes out, several hours after news events have happened. I will tell you, if we don't run those stories, we'll get thousands of people call complaining saying, where was the story on so-and-so and so-and-so? So it sounds like whoever asked the question is already reading information in a digital space quite a bit, doesn't need to see those AP stories. I will tell you that thousands of readers who still maybe aren't as digitally savvy or aren't following as close in digital space, who still want to read those stories. So this is a daily sort of struggle that we face, which is, do we run this in a newspaper? Is it too old? but it's such a momentous event, maybe we should still run it. I mean, it's a daily discussion and debate that we have here. The decisions, we have a team at night that is in charge of pulling those stories. We will, as a group, all the editors talk about what should be on the front page. So we'll generally decide which AP or Washington Post stories or other wire stories should run on the front page. Again, it's more art than science. If it's a momentous event, we will put it on the front page. Other times, it's, it comes down to, do we have 4 or 5 really strong local stories that are worthy of the front page? Great. No national stories will go on the front page those days. Slower local news day, maybe we don't have 4 or 5 great local stories. We want a couple national stories around that front page. Well, what stories should those be? We have a debate about that. It's more art than science, I will tell you that. But at the end of the day, we're trying to figure out what's really critical, important story, what really deserves to be on the print front page. Is it going to be too old by the next morning? Yeah, so maybe that's not the story. Maybe we should, or maybe the Washington Post wrote a second day approach to this story so that, well, this story broke yesterday. Yeah, but if you actually read the story, you'll see the Washington Post actually leapt ahead and the story is talking about what's coming next with this topic. So we'll look for those kinds of AP and Washington Post stories, more of that second day futuristic looking story. That way it doesn't feel as old. So those are the questions and debates that go on. But I will tell you what this question hit on is really the daily tension point. And it goes more and more to who is a newspaper print product serving and what role should it play? No easy answers there.
Ashley asks, for small organizations and nonprofits that rely upon the media to help hold accountable public officials and government, how do we best explain our news and concerns to the media to see strong stories that help inform our community?
Contact us. If you think there's a great story we should be covering, let us know. Contact me, contact one. We have on our website, you can see contact information on page 2 of the newspaper. We always run, there's my information, a couple of our local news editors. Listen, we do not pretend to know everything. We do not pretend that we're covering every important story in the city of St. Louis or the region of St. Louis County and beyond. We love when people call us and say, or email us or write us and say, you should be writing about this, or there's this great program, or there's this big event, or there's this whatever. So let us know the stories you think we're missing. We may not agree. We may say, oh yeah, we know about that. Or we may go, wow, that's great. Thanks for letting us know. We're on it. So yeah, we're wide open to story suggestions.
Is there any way that the Post-Dispatch can get more coverage from Jefferson City and not just during the legislative session?
So things slow down past legislative session. We do have 2 reporters in Jeff City, which is, by the way, more than the Kansas City Star and Associated Press at this point. So we do have 2 people. They do some stories in the off session. I will tell you, I was talking about nonprofits. So one a branch of the nonprofit universe has opened state house bureaus in several states, including Missouri. Here it's called the Missouri Independent. So if you Google the Independent Missouri, you'll get their website. They've got more people than we do now at this point covering Jeff City. And here's what I like about that. Are they a competitor? I mean, kind of, but they make their stories available to media outlets for free. In fact, they know we have a bigger audience, right? They know we have audiences. And so they like when we pick up their work. We have been running stories from the Missouri Independent. It's good stuff. Why not? And it's free and it's good for our readers to, and if it's stories we're not covering or that we're not aware of, hey, we're going to run it. So they do try to do stuff off session, but we do have essentially not an official partner, but there is another outlet that we're going to start running and relying on, and it's doing good work.
Ellen wants to know why, when she opens St. Louis Today, it always favors sports.
Great question. That's true. Fair, guilty. Well, if you looked at digital metrics, you would see how much sports drives traffic. It is a gigantic audience, especially the Cardinals. Cardinals coverage is a monster. It is such a large driver of traffic and subscriptions. So, I get that. Guilty as charged. That's us following the audience. Now, I would say two things to that. Cardinals are its off season. Are we overplaying slew coverage? Are we overplaying? Probably. I think there are days where the pendulum swings too far towards sports. There are days where I'll go to the website and I'll be like, really? 5 sports stories, 4 of which probably not that many people care about. So I do think there are days where the pendulum goes too far. So that is a fair criticism. I don't like it sometimes myself. But the reason you see it, and we do have to recalibrate and moderate, so fair criticism. Thank you for that. You've reminded me that should be a priority. But I will also tell you the reason you're seeing it is it's a huge driver for us. It just is. It's not just us, by the way. All newspapers, all news organizations, sports is just a monster.
I want to go back to the nonprofit question because we have a clarification. She's looking for what do nonprofits need to provide to reporters that would help build a strong story? How do they best explain their news and concerns? Can you speak to that?
I am reading the question now. All that need to provide to reporters. Oh, is this the question about how local nonprofits can get news coverage? Yes. Okay, I was confused. How do we best our news and concerns? Like I said, I think it's just reaching out to our staff members. So whether it's our local news editor, it could be an individual reporter. So maybe what would be helpful is Brenna, you and Barbara, I can maybe email you some key contacts at the Post-Dispatch. Maybe you can share that with the group. Like, hey, if you've got an interesting story or you're part of a nonprofit group that's doing interesting work that you think deserves news coverage, we can let you know how to contact us.
Great.
I will tell you though, Ashley, to be fair, we get a lot of people kind of say, hey, we're doing great stuff. You should write a story about it. Okay, so maybe this helps. There are many, many nonprofits doing really neat things in St. Louis. We cannot possibly write about all of them. It's after a while, it's just not news. Like, it's great work, but is it news? There's a difference. And so I would say, if someone's going to approach us saying my group or my nonprofit is doing something interesting, you have to think about, yeah, but what's the news? Is there a new challenge that you're trying to tackle? Is it a new program that, news, new, right? The root word of news is new. We're providing new information. So what's different? What's unique? What's new about what your organization is doing that therefore makes it news? Again, I'm not judging the benefit of it or the morality of it or the philanthropy behind it, but is it news? And that's what you have to ask yourself before you approach us. What's different? What's unique about this? What's new about it? What's going to make a reader a headline and go, oh, that's interesting. I want to read about that. Because that's how we're going to judge the story. So a headline that says, nonprofit does great work providing clothes to children. I don't know that that's new or news. They've been doing that. But a different headline, nonprofit starts new program to tackle lead poisoning, which has been neglected for decades. Okay, that's new, that's different, that's interesting. I'm just pulling examples out of thin air, of course. But that's something to think about. When I think a lot of people approach us, then they get upset that we don't cover it because we've asked those kinds of questions back to them.
Thank you. Mary, who's watching on YouTube, says, I know the opinion section is separate from the news pages, but can you have discussions with Tom Robertson about the columnists? I think the paper might attract more readers if the community columnists were changed on a routine basis. How about replacing Janet Jackson and Lynn Schmidt, maybe someone with expertise in housing or homelessness?
So what I'm going to do, Todd Roberson is our editorial page director. I will include his contact in what I send you, Barbara and Brenna and Mary, whoever, if it was Mary who asked that question, you're free to contact Todd directly, email or call him and relay that concern. finding local columnists, by the way, is not easy. Writing a really good column is a very difficult thing to do. It's not a skill that everyone possesses. So I know I've had people say, you should find a columnist on this. It's harder than you think. Writing a really good column is very, very difficult. It's why people like Bill McClellan, there's like a crazy genius at work there. The ability to have an incredibly high batting average with columns and to be continually compelling. You know, Tony Messenger, you may not agree with his politics. He won a Pulitzer Prize for a series of columns on prisons in Missouri and debtor prisons. That is so difficult to do with a column, to find a topic and make it engaging. Writing well is a skill many people do not possess to begin with. Writing an interesting newspaper column is an even finer skill. It's a very unique skill. It's why I don't write columns that frequently. It's hard to do. So I will tell you, it's not as easy as just find another columnist. It's not that easy. It's a very unique skill. So, but anyways, on the larger point about, I will include Todd's information and anyone can relay their concerns directly to him on that.
This question is about coverage of propositions proposed by various government bodies. Is there any, Maria misses the free access or easy access for the general public for facts and unbiased opinions, since those propositions are so, they're written with so much legalese and so many double negatives.
Right.
Is there, can you run additional coverage, especially right before the election, so the readers are educated?
So before every election, every big election, we will do a voter's guide that runs in print. And we did it in the spring, we did it this fall. If there is a proposition on the ballot, we will run the ballot language, but then we will also try to run like an explainer. Well, here's what it really means. I will tell you that that is produced in partnership with the League of Women Voters. They do a phenomenal job of tracking down all the candidates for office, getting them to fill out questionnaires, getting the list of all the issues, trying to summarize what they say. League of Women Voters, fantastic organization, does a great public service with that. We would not be able to produce those voter guides without them. It's really their guide. We're just the conduit. But we do provide that as a public service. Also, if it's a really high profile, like statewide issue or one that involves a big tax proposal, we will write news stories where we will point out, here's what it really says, et cetera, et cetera. I will tell you, though, fairly, that there are some elections where there's just so many school issues or municipal issues, it becomes very difficult for us to try to chase every single one of them. And there is a burden placed there on the public to get that information on their own. So we try to do as much as we can within reasonable limits.
Going back to the sort of online, I don't know if it's nonprofit, but someone wanted to know your opinion on reddit.com.
You know, Reddit is interesting. It's like a lot of other social media sites. Reddit, I think, can be really good if you're interested in a particular topic. Reddit seems to specialize in specialty topics. So if you're really interested in parasailing on the Mississippi River, Reddit could be a great, I don't know, is that even a thing? Can you even, I don't know where I got parasailing in the river from, but Reddit can be a great place to find like-minded people, share ideas, et cetera, et cetera. I do know a lot of people use it as a news service. They go in and they find news stories. And again, like with Facebook or Twitter, where are those stories coming from? What are the sources? A lot of our stories get shared on Reddit. So it does help distribute our stories. I would just say Reddit can, like any other social media outlet, it can be the Wild West. And there could be a lot of bad information on there. What I find really interesting about Reddit, where I think, in my mind, the great value is, like I said, is if you've got a specific interest, you can find some great communities on there sharing some really good information and tips, consumer type information on particular topics that you're interested in. If you're using Reddit as a primary source of news, I would not be a fan of that.
Great. So that's the end of our question list. And I asked for more, and I think everyone is satisfied. Thank you so much, Alan, for being with us today. This was really informative. We are really grateful.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This has been great. I hope I cleared up some questions, misconceptions, present some new information, but thank you for having me. This was fun, and I will follow up with some contact information that you can all share.
So I dropped in a link to our support page, which includes a place to donate and to join. I know that there's some non-members with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. And just check out our website or subscribe to our newsletter for future programs. Thanks for being with us.